There is just silence. This astounded and upset her. Without asking another question, she told me in so many words, because my prayer was not in keeping with my virtue, I had none. It was obvious I had gone wrong somewhere, and was probably suffering from illusions such as St. Therese described in those who think they are more advanced than they are. My prayer was nothing more than a natural silence, and therefore not from God. It was a form of quietism, a heresy in the church. She ended by saying the devil could well have had his hand in this. He was leading me to think I must remain silent when all the time I should be practicing mental prayer. This came as a great surprise because I had never heard such things before, never heard the word quietism, never heard that there could be illusions in the life of prayer, and had no idea why she thought I was trying to put myself up as an advanced soul. But most shocking of all was the notion that I was being led by the devil. My immediate impression was that she had got me all wrong, because there was no attempt to understand. She obviously did not want to understand, and possibly was incapable of doing so. I decided then and there never to speak to her again of my interior life, and I never did. For her part, however, she did not give up so easily, and for years she assiduously kept after me, pointing out every lack of virtue and each imperfection. All this, I was convinced, amounted to nothing more than personality differences. It was obvious I did not fit her mold of perfection, and could not be made over into her image and likeness. There's no use going into the petty details of such a problem. Let it suffice to say that it was a great problem for me. She managed to scatter in my mind the seeds of doubt and fear, fears of all sorts, fears that wanted to draw me from silence into disquiet and anxiety. Though I recognized the source of these fears, this was no help. They persisted for a long time, until God mercifully wiped them out one day in a single, definitive sweep. The worst part of this trial was being caught between God and my superior. It's a tremendous responsibility that religious superiors have over their charges, so to speak, because there's the trust that the novice puts in their superior, because they take the place of God for them. And so to put for a person to be in that position, I can only say God help them, because if they lead astray a novice, what a horrible thing. So she learns in the Carmelite spirituality that Saint Therese of Lisieux, Saint Therese of the Child Jesus, was actually onto something. St. Therese of the Child Jesus took much of the negative sting out of the notion of contemplative passivity by calling it the unitive way of abandonment and trust in God. This means the acceptance of our littleness and helplessness when we come upon the vision of great disparity, or come to naught in the night. Though some identify the little way with other levels of the spiritual life, I think it had its beginning in this stage of the unitive life. Right here, the only way forward is by passive abandonment, when we allow God to carry us, as a parent carries a child, across an otherwise impassable terrain. Apart from this passivity, there is no other way across. Simple as that. So she's 18, 19, 20 years old now in the convent in Alhambra in Southern California, living the austere Carmelite life, mostly vegetarian, happy to have her own room, I'm sure, happy working in the garden. I'm sure there were conflicts of personality and otherwise with the various sisters in her community, but I think overall she got along well with them. And as all 18, 19 not just women, but men, all humans, we have a sexual side that needs to be addressed at some point. And so her being in the unitive state was the context in which she was able finally to come to integration around that aspect of her person. What this stage seems to illustrate is that as beginners, we had unconsciously kept these lower instincts under tight control, kept them at a distance, or did not know we had them at all. But in the night, when this control has to be released and handed over to God, the lower instincts, which have gone unrecognized or have been only suppressed by asceticism, rise up because they have never been dealt with in the first place. When tapping into the well springs of being, we are also tapping into man's deepest instincts, which surprise and disquiet us. Running away with God does not mean we can run away from any aspects of our humanity. Rather, it means we can now afford, with His help, to turn and face them squarely, to deal with them once and for all, as we now do in this second phase of the night. We deal with these foxes, as St. John of the Cross called them, nymphs and lions, by remaining in our center of silence and becoming objective about their movements, seeing them for what they are, and taking them in stride with no disquieting result. In time, these movements lose their power over us and disappear as mysteriously as they came. I just love that. I get choked up because I won't get personal here, but yes, sexual desires arise very mysteriously at different ages for each of us, and they fall away equally as mysteriously, she says. But whatever the final cause of these disturbances, the most immediate lesson they teach is the urgent and imperative need for total unity of being, total unity with God. It is not enough to be united with God in the most interior part. We must also be united with Him in all parts. God must somehow satisfy the whole man, not just the interior man. He must show us He loves the whole of our humanity, not just the center of our soul. His love must engulf us completely and satisfy every level of existence. But can He do this? When I came to this point, I doubted very much that God could stoop to this too human level. Instead, I had expected to be elevated to His level. But as it happens, is a little of both. God comes down and the soul goes up. Up and away, in fact. What I discovered is that God not only can satisfy the whole man, but exceeds all boundaries in doing so. He can possess us so fully as to obliterate the self, take over its existence, its very breath, and completely dumbfound us. There is left no doubt that God loves the whole of man, and that our need for this holistic love is all in the nature of things, the way we were made, and that it is God's pleasure to prove this love to man. So she's living the Carmelite life, gets up early. They come together and pray 5 times a day. Terce, sext, non, those are Latin words for times of day that they get together and pray. They eat lunch in silence mostly, listening to reading from the Carmelite saints or the Bible. And then she starts realizing that this life is wonderful and actually quite easy, and that she's not really being challenged. Her unitive state is not being tested. So she starts to think, maybe it's God's will for me that I leave the monastery. She did not want to leave, but she started to think that maybe that's what God wanted of her, and so she told her superior that. And her superior said, oh, they all say that, come back to me in a year, and if you still feel like you want to leave the monastery, well, then we'll talk. So she felt with a clean conscience she